it's Angela with the podcast Refocus with Angela Stevens. I am so delighted to introduce you to our guest today. This guest is someone that you may know, you may have heard about, and lastly, you've probably read one of his articles that he's written on a very famous website. So our guest today is Dr. John Whyte. He's the Chief Medical Officer for WebMD, and he leads the efforts in developing and expanding strategic partnerships that create meaningful change around important and timely public health issues. I have so much to ask this gentleman, but in the meantime, Dr. Whyte, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. It's interesting. When I was reading your bio, I want to share with everyone that when I was going through this a couple of weeks ago, that you are a board certified internist. You did your residency at Duke University. You earned your Master of Public Health and Health Policy and Management at Harvard. And prior to going to Washington, you were in health services research and actually did a lot of television work with the Discovery Channel, right?
That's right.
Awesome. So before we get started, I have a question I ask everyone. So what was it about you that before you entered into this field, what was it that made you say, I want to be the Chief Medical Officer for WebMD?
I always thought I would be a surgeon, actually.
Interesting.
Or I thought I would be a dean of a medical school or department chair. And
sure,
I'm the Chief Medical Officer at WebMD. So really, to be honest, Angela, it was about being open to opportunities and looking at things a different way. So I never was one to have like a 10-year master plan or a 5-year master plan, but I've been open to opportunities as they arose. And it's almost, in a way serendipitous. I wasn't looking for it, but they, found me and really had that dialogue. And I think more people can benefit from that as they think about what do they really want to accomplish? Because then you're not bound to what a particular job is, but it's really about what your profession is and your goal. And my goal has always been to communicate health information to people, whether it's in the policy world of government, which I've spent a lot of time in, or it's in the communication world, such as Discovery Channel, or WebMD. So, or it's that one-to-one with the patient in front of you. So that's really kind of how I ended up at WebMD.
Well, you're certainly with a great company. As we spoke before, I own a search firm, right? And I've interviewed people. We've actually placed people at WebMD as well. So it's a great company, well known. When I think of WebMD, I would say that our audience, it's the go-to, right? Yeah. If I'm probably like one of many I've diagnosed myself several times, right? And with a lot of different things.
Hopefully correctly.
Physicians do not like it when you do that because you can almost scare yourself. But, has WebMD as a whole changed from 10, 15, 20 years ago? Is it still the platform where people go to find information and they think maybe they've got something wrong, like a heart attack or something? Do they go to WebMD, or is that the focus of, where your company is right now?
Well, if they're having a heart attack, I hope they go to 911, just so listeners know that. But, WebMD certainly, has changed. 76 million people come to the website every month. They spend over 6 minutes on the site every month. So, certainly when you search, we're typically number one or number two. But search has changed for consumers. I remember even just a few years back where, people would search arthritis or they'd search, high lipids, and they print everything out. Maybe you did that and then you'd hand it to the doctor, and then the doctor typically would just push it to the side and ignore it. That's not what's happening anymore. What we're really saying is people are searching content. They want to learn about knee pain, joint pain, back pain, heart disease, but then they want to connect it to care. They want to do something now. So I want a telemedicine visit with a rheumatologist right now. I want to order a lab test if I'm having signs and symptoms of STDs or even COVID. And how do we help provide that connection to care? And that's really how we've evolved. People just aren't content with searching information and then waiting 6 weeks to talk to their doctor about the mole on their back. They want to do something now. And we all need to adjust to meet those expectations of patients.
Right. I think that's terrific. I always tell my family or people that work for me, I always say, if knowledge is power, right? If you find out that, you've got a certain gene or
Mhm.
something, that goes into a different direction, go research it. Find out what you can to prevent it. Preventive medicine is so important.
Mhm.
And before, I think we would all shy away from going to our doctor. And now, even with televisits, even in the counseling and psychiatric world, we're in a place that we've never been before,
Yeah.
where people who might not have wanted to go now have that platform to use it in a confidential setting. And I think that's terrific.
Yeah.
So in terms of focusing, this podcast, as you know, is all about how to focus. So,
Mhm.
there's a lot of people right now that have great anxiety with this pandemic. And I asked someone the other day, I said, so he's out of work. And I
Mhm.
said, how are you doing? And he said, I kind of feel like I'm in this cave.
Mm.
And I know I got to come out of that cave, but I'm hesitant. And this is a 55-year-old
Mhm.
person. And it shocked me when I heard that. So I see that coming. What is your advice to those individuals?
We have a mental health pandemic as well as an infectious disease pandemic. And,
Mhm.
these challenges of mental health are going to continue once we safely get past, COVID. So how are we going to address it? It's funny you mentioned, you said to them, well, how are you doing? There's really this campaign that's out there that says, how are you doing
Oh,
really? Really?
mhm.
Add that other point, right? Because so often it's almost perfunctory. How are you doing, Angela? Fine. How are you doing? Fine. And
Yeah.
we never
Mhm.
really take the time to see how someone is doing, how they might be struggling, and be
Right.
prepared to talk to them about it and address it, and letting people know it's okay to not be okay right now. We've
Right.
been in a pandemic that occurs once a century, and it's been going on for a year, and we still have a little bit of a way to go. I'm very hopeful. I do feel there's light, but there's still at least a couple more months. So how do we help people acknowledge that it's okay not to be feeling okay? And
Mhm.
then how do we help them get help, whether it's professional help or talking to friends and family members? Angela, it's interesting because when I talk to patients, if I asked you, what don't you like about yourself? Typically a patient will say, they can rattle off 5 things real quickly, right?
Yeah.
If I said to you, what do you do well? There's really a pause. People
Mhm.
might come up with one thing. And we really need to flip that and focus on more often, what do you do well? What can you be proud about? And less focused on what aren't you doing right? Why does someone else seem to be so much more successful? That's where I think we really need to be going in refocusing and doing this self inventory. And in
Mhm.
many ways, being kind to yourself and recognizing your strengths. And we all have them.
I applaud you. I applaud your team for that. Many don't know this. We just launched two guided anxiety journals. One is for adults and one is for teens. I am not a doctor. I'm
Mhm.
not a counselor, but I have a high functioning child that had
Mhm.
ADHD as a single mother. It created our company, which is Refocus the Creative Office. But at age 45, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And so there was a big stigma 10 years ago, and we're really on a mission to change that stigma. As we were writing this journal, we did it with our team, and it was all about positivity. How can we take this to, doing something positive, and we included resources. And I think that's so important. So I'm glad to hear that. And I will make a note on this that in May, I believe that is World Mental Health Month, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. We're giving away journals during that month, but we really want to promote that because we're
Mhm.
all about positivity and how to focus better.
Sure.
So that is coming out. But for you, let's say you're having an off day, right?
Mhm.
And you're not
Mhm.
focused that day. How do you tune everything out, and how do you focus on what has to be done? Because I have a feeling your schedule may be a lot like mine or worse,
Mhm.
where it's hard to you can't even get to the afternoon without going
Yeah.
through a ton of things in the morning. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I do try to take a few minutes sometimes when I'm not, feeling that productive or feeling that great. I like to listen to music. I find
Mhm.
music very engaging. I'll be honest, sometimes I listen to these church hymns that I've been doing for the last
Yeah,
few years, and I feel like I'm almost in like a choir, at a
love it.
concert. And some of them have particularly meaning. to my family. Um, so that's where I feel it's kind of a reset. I'll share a story. I actually listened to this song. It's called "I Am the Bread of Life," and it
Mm.
was always important to my mother and important to my father, and they both have passed away. And it's about in the Christian faith resurrection.
Mm.
And I always find it enormously comforting. And I'll share with you, I do it also because it reminds me of my parents who have done
I love
so
that.
much for me. Gives you a minute or two just to reset and to remember, what's important.
hmm that's fantastic. I lost my
Mhm,
father to Parkinson's a couple of years
mhm.
ago, and I did the music and the video for his funeral. And I go back on my computer and I do the same. But I would like a recording, a copy of that when you're singing, so we can play. I'm just,
Yeah.
no,
No, I'll
I'm
send you
sure,
the link. I'll send you the link.
awesome.
And
I'm sure you're a
everyone has
great
different
singer.
faiths and different songs, and it's just, music does have that effect on our brain. It could even be a couple of minutes. Another friend said to me the other day, I'm not making this up, she has young children like I do. She's like, I sometimes, she says, she just goes in the bathroom for 3 minutes. She doesn't really have to go to the bathroom, but she just goes for her own privacy. And I joke, sometimes for 3 minutes with young kids, that could still be disaster
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
But it's that recognition that sometimes you just kind of need a few minutes to yourself. It's not even every day, to be honest, for me, but every now and then, it's just kind of that reset that I use.
I love that. And I find that so empowering.
Mhm.
One of the things that we talked about the other day, I was actually having a discussion with my staff about that. And I said, we all have struggles and we've all had failure, right?
Mhm.
And so, or if you haven't in this lifetime, you may,
Yeah.
but when we're stressed, we go to something, right?
Mhm.
Whether it be your faith or your spiritual, direction, or exercise, or alcohol, or whatever it is. I have a question about that unhealthy area of if we're stressed and we go to vaping, or we go to alcohol, or we go to anger.
Mhm.
I know you have resources for that, but I think there's a lot of people, especially in the vaping world and the younger
Mhm.
college age kids. How do they make that turn?
It's hard. And, I joke whenever we're stressed, we go to, fatty, sugary foods. It's always ice cream and chips. It's never hummus and carrots. And then there's a reason why that is in some ways. It's
Right.
something called that endocannabinoid system that
Mhm.
causes, the release of those pleasure hormones, dopamine, and some others.
Mhm.
And it's the same in terms of, vaping and alcohol. And for some people, it becomes addiction, or they feel it calms their nerves. A lot of patients will say that
Mhm.
in terms of smoking. And it can be challenging, especially in young people, to
Mhm.
help them recognize what are the long term effects. How's this going to impact you 10 years from now? How's this going to impact you 20 years from now? Because no one that's young thinks about what it's going to be 10 or 20 years from now. They'll deal with it later. So, in some ways, it's about trying to help them again reset for their overall health and where they want to be, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and what's important to them. But then also, Angela, giving them alternatives. So, if someone says, I'm going to take away your cigarettes, well, what are you going to help them do in return in terms
Mhm.
of a positive habit, or something that's going to be, helpful? I've tried to start resuming exercise again. That was an option that I did before. And for whatever reason, even though I'm home, I feel like I have less time to do it. But you know what? No one ever regrets after having done some exercise. You never say like, "Oh, I wish I did. I wish I didn't go to the gym, or I wish I didn't, do 20 minutes on the treadmill." You always feel like I'm king of the world. I can do anything now. So in some ways, it's finding that time, but it's also, it goes to the first point, talking to people to understand why they feel they need that crutch, why they feel they need that comfort from an external source, and how do we help them through it? It's hard. And let's be
Yeah.
honest, there's lots of false starts and stops. And it's not like you're going to try and then you're going to succeed the first, second, or third time. But you have to keep at it and keep going.
So important. One thing that we've done with our company, and we're starting to do more, is encourage people walking together. And what I've
Yeah.
said is, look, block out your calendar for 15
Yeah.
minutes. And if you're working remotely, go with somebody if or go by yourself. But even here, I know I've said, bring your tennis shoes, right? We might not get there today, but we'll get there tomorrow or the next. And it's a little part, but it's something. And I think if employers did that more and more, which I think they are, I think there can only be a great outcome.
And there's that
from
sense
that.
of community. But I had a really interesting interview with someone last week that talked about this concept of loneliness. So here, many people, particularly if they don't have a family, that they're, by themselves and, they're lonely. And that can cause lots of challenges, early dementia, other problems. But then there's another group of people that have been around the same people for an entire year, whether it's your family or, your roommates, and you might need some time to yourself, this concept of loneliness. So for some people on a walk, they're going to need a 10-minute walk by themselves.
I always said my husband, he married a woman with ADHD, and then he's got a son that has ADHD. So I think you need a lot of alone time, actually. When I go back to, just regular questions that people write to us and ask us to ask our guests.
Yeah.
One of the ones that I hear more and more is failure. Right. Mm-hmm. And what I tell them is, in my search firm, I always say, look, today's CEO can be tomorrow's janitor, vice versa. Not that we want that to happen, but we're all human. Mm-hmm. Right. So have you in your lifetime experienced failure, and how did you get through it?
Sure. Absolutely. And we all experience failures, especially when we have goals. But, and people say this, and, when you're young, you don't really listen to it. We really learn so much more from our failures than we do from our successes. And it sounds kind of trite, but it really is true in the sense that you learn to be a better person. You learn to be a better business person. You learn to be a better doctor in many ways. You really do learn from your failures, despite how painful it can be and how challenging it is in the moment. I mean, if you always succeeded in whatever you did, how are you really going to gain satisfaction and comfort from that? It's almost like you expected to get it and you got it. So what does it really matter? Whereas, if you have failed at times, when you do have those successes, you feel so much better. So, part of it is, to be honest, you have to give yourself some time. It's not like you failed in doing something that was important to you, and then the next day you wake up and everything is fine. It just doesn't happen that way. In reality, it does take some time, and you have to give yourself some time. And then you have to think about, how do you learn from it and where do you go from there? In many ways, it can be a wake-up call too, in terms of, a sign that maybe there's something else you should be thinking about.
When Oprah had her show, she had Maya Angelou on there, and I'll never forget this, like yesterday. And I think it was when Oprah was going through her lawsuits or something, and she said, "What do I do? Like, how do I deal with this?" And Maya Angelou said, "Say thank you."
Yeah.
And that, I'll never forget that. Mm-hmm. It made such an impact with me, because I realized all of my failures, I've learned from them. It's like we're a mold, and we're crafted into who we become, right?
Harry Potter's author was rejected by 20, 30, publishers. So, sometimes there's a reason why too.
Exactly. And going on with that failure, a lot of things that I hear, we have a large audience in the ADHD market, mm-hmm. and because they all want to learn how to focus better, right? One of the challenges that I can connect with them on is empathy. Mm-hmm. And I told someone the other day, I said, look, empathy, we all could do better at, right? But if you have a child, or if you have a teenager or an adult child, and let's say that they don't have any empathy, right. And it may be from, with the ADHD connection, or may just be anything, right? Or maybe they're not an outgoing person. Mm-hmm. How do you train, and how do you help them get empathy? Because I had a counselor tell my son once that he should volunteer like at a hospital with sick children. And that was a great idea, but it didn't work for him. Yeah. What worked for him was animals, being around.
Well, that's important. I think part of it is, and I'm not an expert in this space either, it is about different experiences. It's about shared experiences as well. We can't live in our own, silos. That's what we do too often. And we don't meet people that are different than we are. We don't meet people with different experiences, both ways. So in some ways, it's about having those deep and rich experiences and creating relationships with people that just aren't like you, but are different than you. And then how do you learn from it? And that takes work. It takes maturity as well. We have to recognize that in terms of a higher level emotion. Kids aren't going to, be able to exhibit that emotion as well. They're still learning to deal with their emotions. And then teenagers have all sorts of different emotions they have to deal with. So it does take time, but it's important to be able to, empathize with what other people are experiencing as well. But you have to kind of meet them
Right.
literally and figuratively to understand that.
Right. So I know we're on a time crunch. We are so delighted to get you on our show today. But I have two questions, and one goes along with the empathy and failure. But it was an article I read about, with COVID, so many people have passed away,
Mm.
and people didn't know what to say
Yeah.
to people who've had a loss. And I think again, that's where we kind of go and you hear sorry for your loss, and
Mhm.
it seems so cold. A lot
Yeah.
of them felt like that. Do you have any ideas of what else you can say or do when, whether it's a family member or maybe you know of a family that's gone through that? What can you do?
Yeah, it's hard. A lot of people are angry that they weren't able to
Mhm.
share that experience, to be there at that hour. And there's different strategies, and other people are skilled at that. Sometimes it's just, being there and checking on them,
Mhm.
asking them if there's anything that you can do. Sometimes it's just sending food or sending flowers to let them know that you're thinking about them. I know I kind of feel the same way, like saying, "Oh, sorry for your loss." Maybe that helps a little, but what more can you do? How can you help? And to be there, to be able to listen to them, to allow them to vent,
Mhm.
and express their frustrations, and see
That's
where they
great.
may need some support.
That's great. The article even
Being a
said,
good listener.
yes, being a good listener, but it did say, I'm so sorry,
Mm,
and pausing. And just that is that
good point.
with that statement, it seemed to really help. So,
Hmm.
so our last question, which is probably one of our most exciting questions that everybody loves on the show,
Mm,
and you may have mentioned it already, but let's say you've got to go to that important presentation, and it's a big one,
mhm,
and it's one that you've really got to have game on,
mhm.
right? So you get in your car and you're driving there or on the train or whatever, and you get there. What is the music that you listen to that gets you focused?
And I should say, like other people, I do a lot of preparation. So I like to be prepared. So, again, it's, I listen to some religious tunes, but I also listen just in general to pop music. My wife is a big jazz person. I'm not. But for me,
It sounds good, though. I
just,
know.
I just like kind of pop dance music in
Yeah,
a way
yeah,
that's, or gym music.
yeah.
That's kind of what I listen to, because it kind of puts me in a good mood, and gives me some energy. So that's what I
Bruno
like to
Mars,
listen to.
anything like that,
Yeah, you're right.
24-karat magic in the air. Head to toe so clear. Look out. Pop, pop, it's showtime. 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 Guess who's back again? Oh, they don't know. Gone time. Oh, they don't know. Gone time. I bet they know as soon as we walk in. Showed up. I'm wearing Cuban links. Yeah. Designer mix.
There's so many. I'm very passionate about music, and I always say music is healing, and it can bring you up, it can bring you down. And
Mhm,
if you're in that funk and you just can't get out of it, I always
mhm.
say, put on some upbeat music and get away from what you're at now. Walk away and come
Yeah,
back.
it really is. It really is.
We
Yeah.
we have a saying. We always say we all get so busy that sometimes we need to stop,
Hmm.
take a moment, and refocus.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Dr. Whyte, so much for being on our
Absolutely.
show today. It's we're thrilled to have you.
Mhm.
And if anyone wants to find your articles
Sure.
or read more on WebMD, do you have a certain section of WebMD that you write in?
I mean, you can Google Lemony and you'll come to it.
Okay.
But I usually repost at Dr. John Whyte on Twitter. You can follow me on Instagram, as well. And you can find me on the website at webmd.com. It really
Perfect.
was a pleasure talking to you today. And thanks for all that you're doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And that's Dr. John Whyte. It's WHYTEMD at webmd.com. So thank you again.
Terrific. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Refocus the Creative Office. They create all of their products through the eyes of a child with ADHD. They create products that help you focus and refocus. Do you ever forget your passwords? I forget my passwords all the time. They have over 11 versions of password books. They've got large, they've got mini, they've got left-handed versions, and they just came out with 2 brand new camouflage versions in green and pink. Hopefully these products are going to help you focus and make your life better. Have a great week.